So, Sonic 3D Blast. Bit of an interesting game, huh? With it technically being the first 3D game in the series, at least I think it is, and a pretty unique one at that, where the entire game is shown in an isometric angle and has an interesting mechanic where you progress through the stage by collecting flickies and getting them through the warp rings to open all kinds of gates. Sonic 3D Blast to me is one of the most it's just there Sonic games. Like, I don't really mind playing it for the most part, but it's not one I really think about going back to. It's one of those games where I play it every once in a while, have a mostly decent experience, and then once I beat it, I stop thinking about it for a while. And that will most likely be the case after this video. Of course, that doesn't mean there's nothing to talk about. It did lay some groundwork for future entries in the series. Obviously, being the first Sonic game with some kind of 3D control is one of the big factors. But it also technically introduces the homing attack in the form of the homing shield. And that's not to mention, some of the music pieces in this game would be used again in certain stages of Sonic Adventure. From the Genesis version anyway. Yeah, much like Sonic CD, this game has two different soundtracks, one for the Genesis and one for the Saturn. But unlike Sonic CD, the soundtrack isn't the only difference between these two. They also have different graphics, aesthetics, and even completely different special stages. And as usual, I played both versions of the game. Which one is better, you may be asking? I mean, they don't really play that differently from each other, and they basically control the exact same. Though they do both have things I prefer over the other. Like, obviously the graphics look better on the Saturn version, but that version also has much better special stages. Not just because, well, look at the Genesis version, but they're also really fun to play on their own. Hell, I'd argue they're more fun than the game itself. Maybe someday I'll do a special stage ranking in the future. I will say though, I do prefer the soundtrack of the Genesis version. The Saturn soundtrack isn't bad at all. Special shoutouts to the title theme, Green Grove Act 1, Rusty Ruins Act 2, and both acts of Diamond Dust. I especially love how festive they sound. But I just found a lot of the music in the Genesis version more memorable and catchy. For this video I'll go through the Genesis version, since I go by the ones that are widely available. But I'll mention the Saturn version every now and then. Anyways, we have a total of 7 zones for this one, and I think it's a decent enough selection. None of them reach S tier, but there are surprisingly a couple of A tier stages I actually quite like. But we first have to go through a couple stinkers in this game, which aren't the worst stages in the franchise, but overall hinders the experience for this game. So without any more delay, let's get to Sonic 3D Blast. You know, I always hear people say that Marble Zone was a bad second level in Sonic 1 because of how much of a pace breaker it is, and I completely understand why people think that way. I mentioned Marble Zone because I feel Rusty Ruin doesn't get enough credit for being a bad second level in this game. Because holy shit, I forgot how annoying this level is. While it isn't the worst level I've ever played, there are some really questionable design choices here. To start off with why this level is annoying, it has some of the cheapest placement of hazards in the game, containing things like iron balls, stone spikes, and flamethrowers. See, Sonic 3D Blast is a pretty slippery game, but most of the other stages were aware of its controls, so they designed the stages with them in mind by giving you some kind of warning for their hazards, whether it's a ledge to stop you, or giving you a couple seconds to react to a trap. Rusty Ruin doesn't do that. Instead, it places hazards in areas where you least expect them, which can be very annoying, especially since you can't control the camera due to the isometric angle, increasing the chance of you being blindsided by a stone spike or iron ball while you're running. And this problem is made even worse by the main mechanic of this stage, which involves these spinning fan devices that make you twirl around when you stand on them. You use this move to destroy these pillars blocking your way. Why this ballerina twirl can destroy the pillars but not your spin dash will forever be a mystery to me. Anyways, when you hit a wall while spinning around, you bounce off the wall. So now on top of being kinda slippery, you also get what's essentially pinball physics, a match made in hell. Meaning you have to go through the hazards very carefully and very slowly, making areas like this even more annoying and awkward to go through. There's also these green button-like things, which I think are supposed to be bumpers, but they don't bounce Sonic at all here, though maybe we should be thankful for that considering the physics of the spinning. By the way, good luck getting to the special stages, since Tails and Knuckles are blocked off by pillars. Hopefully you don't lose your rings in the process of getting to them. You might not think that's important, but keep in mind, the Chaos Emeralds are required to unlock the final boss of the game. Though to be fair, you can have multiple chances in later stages, so getting the emeralds in Rusty Ruin is optional. Besides the hazards, what other issues does this stage have? Well, this stage also highlights another flaw with Sonic 3D Blast. It's that precise platforming isn't exactly its strong suit. See, in Act 2, there are certain areas that have moving or falling platforms. Trying to platform on them is like trying to hit a bullseye at darts with one eye closed, because you would need to be precise with your jump, which is made even more challenging with the isometric angle and your barely noticeable drop shadow. And I say would, because you don't even need to go on the platforms to make any progress. You could simply jump over the gaps, and that'll be it. And even if you didn't have the ability to do that, you can get past them easily, either by conveniently placed springs, or ledges that lead you to the other side. So yeah, the platforms are essentially pointless. And one final criticism I have is the breakable walls. The breakable walls in this stage have these pillars next to them, but you could see plenty of them all around the stage, and most of them aren't breakable. That is, except for a select few where you have to make a lucky guess to see if it's breakable or not. I don't know why it's like that. The other stages at least gave you a hint for their breakable walls, so what happened here? I will admit though, I do like the atmosphere of this zone, with its abandoned ruined aesthetic, and it looks even better in the Saturn version because of how misty it is. Plus the Genesis music is really good as usual. Not to mention it does have Vector and Charmy's robot cousins, so that's worth something. It has a fair share of good aspects, but that doesn't save this stage from being quite a mess. I'm noticing a theme revolving around my least favorite stages. I'll be honest, I often forget that Gene Gadget is in this game. I'm not sure what it is that makes this stage forgettable for me. It might be because the next stage, Panic Puppet, has the same obstacles, and is generally a more unique stage compared to this one, as you'll later see. Or maybe it could be because this level isn't all that fun. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Gene Gadget. I mean, there are a couple things I like about this stage, but not enough to make the whole thing worth it. This place is full of these fans where, if you step on them, you'll be floating in the air. Sometimes they aren't so bad to use, but other times they make you vulnerable to certain hazards, like these sentries. Speaking of which, I don't like said sentries. When you get anywhere near them, they start rapid firing blue pellets in a circle. That doesn't sound so bad, but some of these rat badniks are next to these turrets, which, bear in mind, have flickies that you need to collect in order to proceed through the level. The platforming for the most part isn't that bad, but there are a few annoying sections in this stage. The most annoying one is in Act 2, where you have to jump on small moving platforms. If you mess up once, you're sliding all the way down, going through the tedious process to get back to it. And like I mentioned before, precise platforming isn't easy in this game, so expect to fall down at least a few times. It will drive you insane. You also constantly go through these transportation tubes, some of which won't let you proceed until you collect enough flickies. Like I mentioned though, there are positive aspects in this stage. I do like running over these electric floors, which, weirdly enough, the blue shield prevents you from taking damage from them. Odd choice, but I'm not complaining. Also, unlike Rusty Ruin, at least most of the hazards have some kind of warning to them. And the platforming, like I mentioned, can be fun at times, except for the one with the super annoying slide under. There's even a positive aspect for the turret, where if you stand on it, you could spin around, and that's cute to see. Yeah, bottom line, not the most annoying stage in the game, but not really one I look forward to either. So moving on to the only C tier in the game, Volcano Valley is a weird stage to me. It has the groundwork to be a really great lava stage, but I feel it ultimately doesn't really do a good job balancing its difficulty because of a certain oversight that completely screws this stage over. But before we get to that little flaw, let's talk about the stage itself. So taking place in a volcano, obviously there's going to be a lot of fire hazards, from fireballs blasting between platforms, to flamethrowers, to these flaming jump ropes. You also have these breakable blocks, with some of them having a tube that leads you to power-ups or even 1-ups, and sometimes having lava squares that could damage you if you're not careful. The platforming is decent for the most part. You just have to keep watch of your surroundings, and make sure to wait until the fireballs go back down so you can jump over to the other side. Though there are a couple moving platforms, which is kind of annoying. And I will say, it really sucks when you lose your flickies over lava, because some of them scatter around, and the green ones will actively avoid you, which can be really annoying, especially in areas like this, but other than that, it's not a big deal. So as you can see, Volcano Valley is a fine enough level on its own when played normally, but then there's a certain power-up that makes this level a complete joke, that being the Fire Shield. So, if any of you remember my Sonic 3 video, which I recommend checking out if you haven't, that'd be sweet of you guys, You might recall the part where I said that Lava Reef generally did a good job making sure the hazards aren't entirely fire-based, like having spike traps, iron balls, and other stuff like that. They're there to add a risk factor to your fire shield, so that it can help you for the fire-based obstacles, but still needing to be careful of the non-fire-based hazards so you don't lose it. Volcano Valley doesn't follow that philosophy. Once you get that fire shield, this stage basically becomes your bitch. Because like I mentioned, there is a lot of fire hazards in this stage. And when I say a lot, I mean 95% of the stage's obstacles are fire-based. Because of that, you can completely screw this stage over. Fireballs between platforms, go right through them. Flamethrowers on the walls, just pass them by. The flaming jump ropes, no need to worry. And of course, you can run on the lava like you're running in a garden. Literally, the only two things that can take away your shield without killing you are the enemies and these spike balls in Act 2. Which even then, they only appear in one spot that you can easily avoid. Going for Knuckles and Tails for the special stages can take away your shield after you're done. But by this point, you probably got all the Chaos Emeralds, so you have no reason to go for them. It's a shame the Fire Shield makes this stage a joke, because if it weren't for that oversight, I would have considered this a pretty decent stage, if not cheap sometimes. Sure, you can play it without the shield if you want, but why go through the hassle of collecting flickies over lava after getting hit, when you can make it easier with the shield? I'm especially disappointed that a stage with such phenomenal music was wasted on a mid-stage. Seriously, go listen to Volcano Valley Act 2, it is wonderful. Let's just get to the stages that don't get screwed over by power-ups with the B tier zones. Green Grove is a decent beginning level for the game. Much like most of the other opening stages in the franchise, I don't have too much to say about this one compared to other levels in the game. It's essentially the traditional Green Hill formula, but put into a semi-3D format. I feel it does a pretty good job showing off the mechanics of this game and how they work, where, like I mentioned before, you have to destroy badniks and rescue flickies by letting them through these ring portals in order to proceed through the level, and repeat the process until the end. One minor detail I like is how the spin dash panel leads you to a wall where you can see a couple cracks on the side, giving you a hint that it's a spot that you can break through with your spin dash and find some hidden goodies. Mechanically, it doesn't really have that much to offer. There are certain traps scattered around the level, including these turrets that shoot only in 4 directions, and some landmines in some areas. The landmines can be slightly annoying because of how some of them are placed, but there aren't too many of them. There's also 2 cannons, one in each act of this zone, that blasts you to a previous spot in the level. The one in Act 1 is a little more helpful since it brings you to Knuckles. And that's really all I have to say about Green Grove gameplay wise. The only other things I have left to say is that the Genesis version of Green Grove Act 2 holds the title of longest song in the game, where the music goes on for over 4 minutes until it loops. And the Saturn version does have a few cute details for this stage. There are these holes where little moles pop out every now and then, and there are even hard-working moles sticking to the side. Keep on at it, my friends. You'll get there soon enough. Panic Puppet is easily the most unique level in the game, for a variety of reasons. Not only is this the only stage where all the enemies don't have flickies in them, but it's also the only stage in the game where both acts play completely differently from each other. Starting with Act 1, it's definitely the weaker act of the two. It's still a decent stage, but not all that exciting. The most unique aspect here is that there are only one set of flickies in this stage, and they're all trapped in these capsules that you gotta break. Now in terms of the mechanics here, it's nothing all that special. It basically borrows every hazard from Gene Gadget. The sentries, the fans, the floors that give an electric shock, you name it. The only unique obstacles regarding this act are the enemies, and these levers that switch directions of these conveyor belts that leads you to the next section of the act. It does have moving platforms as well, but they are nowhere near as annoying as the ones in Gene Gadget. In fact, these are actually pretty fun to platform on. The fans are also not as annoying in this stage, since they thankfully aren't placed next to hazards. I still don't like the turrets though. Again, Act 1 is pretty decent, but nothing really to write home about. But then Act 2 comes in, and that's when the stage gets way more interesting and creative. In Act 2, there is not a single flicky in sight. All you have to do is get to the end of the level. This, in my opinion, is probably the single best act in the game. Mainly because this is the closest the game has gotten to playing like a proper Sonic game. Because of the fact that you don't have to collect flickies in this act, you can speed through this level bouncing on badniks without having to worry about collecting flickies afterwards, making it very satisfying to play through. You also don't have to worry about chasing flickies after you get hit. If you do, just collect your rings and proceed. And let me tell you, After some of the stages I had to deal with to collect those lost flickies, this feels rewarding. That's not to mention it gives itself a little bit of its own identity with new hazards, like the electric turrets and the floor traps near the end. And I really like how you're scaling up this giant Robotnik tower. You even go up his nose at the end of the level. Gross. Of course, that's not to say it doesn't have its flaws. There are still some hazards that can blindside you, like these damn mines. But it's still fun nonetheless. If the entire stage was like Act 2, it would have easily been at the top of the list, and maybe even an A tier stage. But because of the alright first act, it's brought down to a B tier. Speaking of which, next up is the A tier stages. The 2 stages in the game I actually quite like. Let's get to them. Once again, the ice level goes near the top. Impressive winning streak so far. Anyways, Diamond Dust Zone is honestly such a fun stage. It might not be on the same level of quality as Ice Cap Zone, but it's still very solid for what it is. Once again, the winter atmosphere is wonderful. Instead of taking place in an ice cavern, it takes place in a snowy forest, and it just feels like a winter wonderland. And the zone itself is actually very well paced. It feels fast and fun without having any pace breakers that brings it down. It's full of these ice spikes and snowmen that act like landmines, but you can actually prevent yourself from getting hurt by them. For the ice spikes, you can simply spin dash or just simply roll to destroy them, making platforming a little easier. And for the snowmen, you can destroy them before they explode if you're quick enough. This stage does have slippery floors, but they actually aren't that annoying here, because 1, only a select few areas have them, 2, set areas are thankfully not too annoying to go through, and 3, the game is already kinda slippery. This doesn't really make much of a difference. There's even snowblowers that freeze you, but instead of hurting you like an ice cap, they just make you vulnerable for a little bit. You can easily break out of them using the buttons on your controller. They can even be helpful in rare instances, like that section where you slide down as a frozen ice block, which would inspire a certain stage in Sonic Mania. I also just like the minor details of this stage, like how the snowman badniks have flickies that are frozen in ice that you can break them out of, and springs that are covered with snow that you can clear by jumping on them. The music for this stage is wonderful. It's very whimsical and feels almost festive in a way, and as I mentioned in the beginning, it sounds even more festive in the Saturn version. In fact, the Genesis music is so good that it was brought back for Central City in Sonic Chronicles, and totally didn't butcher the song in the slightest. Nope, not at all. The only things I'm not really a fan of in this stage are these snow rivers, where a few of them require you to jump against the current, which feels repetitive. And there's also this one part in Act 1 where you have to bounce off a spring and not touch any buttons on your controller, because if you move in any way, you're falling down and need to attempt it again, which is slightly annoying. Even then, those flaws only take a tiny portion of the stage, and they don't take away any enjoyment. Also, while I was editing, I just found out that you can break these ice puddles and use them to warp into an earlier area. So yeah, wonderful stage, but of course, it's just behind my favorite stage of the game, which is... Spring Stadium. It was a pretty close call between this and Diamond Dust Zone, but ultimately, this is my favorite stage in the game. Now this is a zone that I think in theory could have been really annoying to deal with if it wasn't handled properly. I mean, it has bumpers, and, as the name implies, a shitload of springs scattered around the zone. It could have made for an absolute nightmare of a stage, but thankfully, they dodged that bullet completely, and made a stage that's a blast to play through. This is probably where the platforming is at its best. Because of the springs, it can be really satisfying bouncing from one platform to another, and keep the fast pace going. It's especially fun with the homing shield, since you can drop down with it by hitting the A button again after jumping. You can use this to bounce off the springs even faster. I honestly love the carnival aesthetic of this place. The red, white, and yellow, combined with the blue and green floor textures, makes this place feel so lively and colorful. It looks even better in the Saturn version because of the hot air balloons and Robotnik statues with neon signs. As for any unique mechanics this stage has, there are these balloons that you can bounce off of, usually over hazardous areas. You don't really need to bounce on most of them since the platforms aren't that hard to reach, but they just feel so much fun to pop, and they thankfully aren't really stingy with their hitboxes. You also have these spikes where if you stand on them for too long, they'll pop up, so they give you enough time to avoid taking damage from them. Given the somewhat slippery controls combined with the isometric camera angle, this was a smart decision. If they were up for the entire stage, I would have been singing a different, way more harsher tune. You even get this cool little spot in Act 2 with Tails and Knuckles next to each other. Not only is that easier for special stages, but it's just neat seeing this trio together. The only somewhat annoying aspect of the stage is the spears. They aren't that common, but they can be annoying in areas like this, and that issue is made even worse in the Saturn version since you can barely see the holes they pop out of. Other than that, this is such a fun stage. Might not be in the same league as the greats of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but definitely the best of 3D Blast. Once again, it's time for the bosses. So 3D Blast's bosses aren't really all that impressive. I mean, most of them aren't that bad to fight. I give them a little bit of leeway for trying to make the best of it with the game's playstyle, but ultimately, they made for some pretty underwhelming bosses compared to the previous console games. Also, strangely enough, the bosses don't have names for their machines, so sadly I have to go with stuff like Green Grove's boss. I know that sucks, but that's just how it is. Number 8 is Gene Gadget's boss, by far the worst boss in the game. Basically, you're on this conveyor belt, and you have to hit Robotnik when he comes down to shoot missiles at you, all while avoiding these spiky mines. It's not really all that hard since you can easily catch up to him and dodge the mines, but it's very boring. You're always waiting for Robotnik to go down so you can hit him, and it really sucks when you miss your mark. Very tedious, moving on. Number 7, we have Volcano Valley's boss. This is a boss that in theory should be challenging, but in practice, it can be defeated very easily. So what you're supposed to do is avoid Robotnik's fire streams that home in on you, and then hit him while jumping off these pipes. The thing is though is that he doesn't move from his spot, meaning you can hit him multiple times and completely cheese this boss fight. Not only that, but when you get hit, you always get hit in the opposite direction you're facing. So even if you get hit from the flames, you'll still be on the pipes. Actually, thinking about it now, this boss is perfect for the stage it comes from. I do give it a couple points, because you can stand on the lava after he's defeated. That's funny. Number 6 is the Spring Stadium boss. All Robotnik does with this thing is float around and occasionally slam his robot hands on the floor, giving you a free hit. You can even use the platforms in the back to score even more hits. Though, you gotta be careful, because like I mentioned, the spikes will pop out if you don't jump in time. It feels more like a first boss than the actual first boss of the game. Speaking of which, number 5 is Green Grove's boss. A pretty simple fight where he drops a spike ball that follows you, and after it stops, he drops it down to pick it back up, and that's your chance to attack. Pretty standard boss fight, not much to say here. Number 4 is Rusty Ruin's boss. It is pretty cool that this thing is a statue controlled by Robotnik, similar to the Egg Golem from Sandopolis. For this one, you plain and simply jump on his arms after he slams either of them on the ground to try to hit you, and then you jump at him. This one can be a little disorienting at first because of the isometric angle, but once you figure out the angle of where you can jump at him, it can actually be kind of fun. You could even land another hit if you manage to land on his hands again. Number 3, the final weapon. As the name suggests, this is the final boss of the game. You only get to fight this thing after you collect the emeralds throughout the game. This thing has 5 phases. For the first phase he has these laser fingers, second phase he makes streams of fire to follow you, third phase he tries crushing you with his robot hands, fourth phase he fires about 5 rockets at you, and in the final phase he shoots a stream of bouncy projectiles to hurt Sonic. This would have been at the top of the list had it not been for one fatal flaw. It forces you to do the process twice. Once you beat the 5th phase, you have to start again at phase 1 just to repeat the process and hit each phase one last time. Why do that? If they wanted to make the fight longer, why not just make each phase take 2 hits instead of 1 for each, and then loop around for 1 more? I don't know whether or not it would make the fight shorter or longer, but it would at least make the fight feel like it's not overstaying its welcome. It's still a pretty good fight otherwise, just wish it was handled a little better. Number 2 is Diamond Dust's boss. This one is kind of like if the Egg Bouncer was combined with the Egg Froster. Basically, Robotnik has these orbiting snowblowers that can freeze you when activated. When you hit him, he loses one and drops snowmen that explodes. This one is simple, but actually pretty fun. I just like jumping over these snowblowers and hitting Robotnik at the right time. That's all I have to say about the fight. Moving on. And number 1 goes to Panic Puppet's boss. This thing has 3 phases, but all of them have the same weakness, which are these blue blinking lights at the ends of both arms. The first phase has these mace arms trying to crush you, the second phase has homing flames, and the last phase has him shooting the bouncy projectiles. This is actually a fun fight. It's actually pretty satisfying going back and forth on each side while avoiding the flames, or preventing him from firing those bouncy bullets. But my favorite of the bunch has to be the first phase, because it can be fun avoiding the maces with a well-timed spin dash. Pretty good boss fight for the final level. Alright, that's 3D Blast Down. Overall, not too memorable of an experience, but not a bad one either. Even if it has its fair share of flaws, I still respect it for making the most out of a Sonic game in a 3D atmosphere for the Saturn, and especially for the Genesis. We're almost done with the classic era, and we only have one game left. Hopefully we go off with a bang. What's next? Oh.